Hi, fellow believers in Christ and those who are interested in learning about the Bible as literature and learning about literary genres. I'm going to continue this series on literary genres and how, and a genre is a style of story, or it's a category of storytelling, it's a type of story such as the epic, the romance, the pastoral, the tragedy, or the comedy. And I argue that those are the only five genres, period. And all of the hundreds of genres that you've heard about, like Western, romantic comedy, epistle, different things like that, all stem from these five. And this includes your own life story, TV commercials, the Bible, historical figures, historical people who actually lived, cartoon characters, everything. Books, movies, everything that has a narrative format falls within these five genres. And we're studying the epic for several episodes, and then we'll move to the romance and then the pastoral and continue on until we finish studying all of these. I just want you to not forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share, because if you do that, then more people will have access to this video. And this is all based on a book that I wrote called One Perfect Hero, Jesus and the Five-Dimensional Narrative. And it was written for everyday people, but it's also written as a college textbook or a high school textbook on literary genre and the Bible as literature. So first of all, we're talking about the epic journey, um, and that's the most, how should I say, one of the key elements of an epic is that there is a long journey that takes place. Usually, it's the hero's lifetime that is the journey, but it could also be other things. An epic journey could have to do with time, space, or a distance of traveling. So you could travel the whole world, that would be an epic journey. Or you could live 100 years, that would be an epic journey through time. Or you could, there could be a huge distance of physical space that you have to cross. So here's a little ant next to a planet, and there's a huge distance of space between an ant and a planet. So one familiar epic hero that you've probably heard of is Frodo, from The Hobbit, and I believe his name was Frodo Baggins. He's fictional, but he is epic nonetheless. And a lot of people think that, um, you know, literary heroes have to be fictional. Well, not really, because you yourself are also an epic hero, and we'll talk more about that later. But Frodo is fictional, and if you read the book or you saw the movies, he has to go on an epic journey. He has to leave um, the place where he lives. I can't remember what it's called. The Shire. He has to leave the Shire, and he has to travel to a mountain where he confronts a dragon. He also he has to go on a long journey through another territory that he's never been in before, where he meets Golem, the hideous creature that lives in a cave, and he gets the ring from Golem, and he has to um, accomplish something with that ring in order to make the world a better place. And then he has to take the ring to, um, I think that's when he has to take the ring to this mountain and do something there with it in order to basically kind of save the world. So that's quite an epic journey, especially since he's just a humble hobbit. All he ever wanted to do was stay home and eat one meal after the other. He didn't want anything else in his life. But then he has to go into these dangerous and exotic and strange places that he's never been in before. So his journey was very epic, and that's one of the reasons why we know The Hobbit, the story of The Hobbit or the Lord of the Rings trilogy is definitely an epic story. Other examples of epics would be, um, uh, I was just going to say, The Three Musketeers. That's an epic story as well as a romantic story. Now, some of these genres cross over, so you'll notice as we do this series that some of these epic heroes are also romantic heroes or tragic heroes. Frodo is a romantic and an epic hero, but today we're just talking about his epic journey. Now, there's lots of epic heroes in the Bible, but the most probably one of the most famous ones is Moses. He also went on several journeys. He journeyed on the Nile River when he was a baby in order to escape being killed by um, the Pharaoh of Egypt at that time, who wanted all of the Hebrew baby boys killed. But Moses escaped by being put in a little ark um, on the Nile River. And then he also took he went up to the Smoky Mountain where God was dwelling so that he alone could speak to the Lord, and no one else could go up that mountain. Only Moses was righteous enough to go up the mountain and speak to the Lord. And the top of the mountain was burning because of the holy fire of God, and it had smoke coming out of it for months. And nobody else could go up there but Moses. And then Moses helped the Israel. Well, he by God's command, he took the Israelites out of Egypt, and they journeyed on a very long journey to the land of Canaan. But before that, before Moses went up the mountain and took the Israelites out of Egypt, he also spent time in the land of Midian for 40 years as a shepherd. He journeyed from Egypt by himself to the land of Midian for 40 years in his wilderness journey while the Lord was developing his faith to the point where he could go back to Egypt and bring his people out by faith. And then when he was bringing them out of Egypt, they had to cross the Red Sea, and that was where the Lord parted the waters, and they could walk on dry ground as the waters were parted. So that also was a part of their epic journey. And so in many ways, just like Frodo traveled in many ways, but Moses traveled a lot more than Frodo did because it took a whole lot more faith for Moses to do what he did than for Frodo to do what he did. Frodo never parted waters or spoke to God face to face on a mountaintop. So Moses is a greater epic hero for sure. He definitely outdoes Frodo. However, they're both epic heroes, and it's very clear by their journeys that they took alone. Plus, the fact that now you don't see Frodo's life at the end of the Hobbit trilogy. Um, I can't remember if Frodo dies or not. If he does, that's in keeping with the epic. But even if Frodo didn't die in the end, um, he still went on an epic journey, so he's still an epic hero. Just like with personality styles, where you don't have to have every single element of the personality style to have that personality. It's the same thing is true of genre heroes. They don't have to have every single element of that genre hero in order to clearly be one of those genre heroes. So if you're mostly romantic, you're a romantic hero. If you're mostly epic, you're an epic hero. Frodo may not be a perfect epic hero, but he's definitely an epic hero. Moses is a perfect epic hero. I mean, you can't argue on any point that he fails as an epic hero because we know when he died too. God himself buried Moses on a mountain in a cave, and nobody on earth knows where Moses was buried because God himself buried Moses and concealed his burial place. Um, so that's pretty epic too. Now, let's talk about Jesus as the greatest epic hero, because he is the greatest epic hero, the greatest romantic, the greatest tragic, the greatest comic hero, and the greatest pastoral hero. But for now, we're focusing on the epic. Jesus isn't just a little bit greater than the greatest epic hero. He isn't just head and shoulders greater. He far surpasses the qualifications of an epic hero. He goes way out, way beyond, out in outer space as far as meeting the qualifications. He, it's kind of like there's qualifications for each hero, and then there's Jesus, who is epically above all of those qualifications. So look where Jesus traveled. First of all, he left his throne in heaven to go down to earth as a baby. Now, that's an epic journey in and of itself in so many ways. Because imagine the courage it would take if you had if you had all power, you created everything. You are eternal and you have no beginning and no end, and you created the entire world and everything and everyone in it, from a little grain of sand to an atom to a human being to a dragon or an elephant, or and the ocean itself. You did it all. And then you would put part of yourself in a fragile, mortal human body, and leave everything you have in heaven, which is everything. There's nothing God doesn't have. And give up your throne, your power, your glory, all of all of your security. I mean, God has way more than, you and I think of security. It's protection. He doesn't even need protection because he has all power. But he left all of that to come down to planet Earth in a human form, in a mortal body. And the courage to, none of us have ever had that kind of courage. None of us. If even if you're just a millionaire, which is nothing compared to being God and having created everything and having control over everything, even if you were a millionaire, it would be really hard to give all that up, wouldn't it, and go live on the street. But that would be so much easier than what Jesus did by leaving his throne and coming to earth as a fragile, vulnerable baby, putting himself in the care of his own creation. Because Mary and Joseph, I'm sure they were intelligent, kind people, but people make mistakes, you know. They could drop him, they could do something wrong that would cause him to get an infection or a disease or whatever. And here he is putting himself into a mortal frame. That's just mind-blowing. Absolutely mind-blowing that God would do that. And the journey to from being God in heaven, the spiritual, emotional, psychological, and everything else you can imagine journey, from going from that to a baby, a fragile, vulnerable, newborn baby, is just indescribable. None of us have made a journey like that. None of us have ever had that kind of courage, period. And we never will. And we'll never have an opportunity to exist to show that kind of courage. But another way he journeyed, which you can see on the right side of this display, is in his ministry on earth. He traveled from town to town by foot. He walked over a great portion of Israel by foot, visiting different regions and cities and spreading the gospel of himself. He is the gospel. And in addition to that, his whole life was a journey to the cross. He even carried the cross part of the time as he walked there, but his entire mortal time on earth was in preparation for the cross. That was a journey. That was a psychological, an emotional, a spiritual journey. It was a social journey. I mean, he had death threats like you would not believe. So many people tried to kill him during his entire ministry, and he decided when it was time for him to go to the cross, and he gave up his life. But his whole life was in preparation for the cross, because he had to live for approximately 30, almost 30 years, never sinning. Now that's a journey too. You and I can't even live for 5 minutes without sinning, at least in our heart, if we're not walking in faith and walking in the Spirit. We can't we can't live without sinning for 5 minutes in our flesh. Our flesh continuously wants to sin, but Jesus didn't sin for his entire time on earth, and it was about 30 years in total. So that's a journey that you and I also have never made. No human on this planet has ever done that. And I mean, that's also unfathomable to think about. Somebody who second by second, minute by minute never sins. That's incredible. And that's one of the reasons why he was constantly in prayer. He was constantly fasting and praying. And we see huge evidence of that in the New Testament, because he was keeping his spirit um, in proper shape so that he wouldn't sin. Now, then, after he died, in that mortal body, he went down to the center of the earth. And I'm sorry, this picture isn't that great, but what it's showing is that Jesus did go into the belly of the earth just like he said he would, and he set the captives free, just as the Bible says. But he didn't let people who were in hell out. In those days before Jesus died on the cross, there was a place in the center of the earth called Abraham's bosom, and Jesus told about it in one of his parables. That was the place where the saints went who never knew him. They didn't know who their Messiah was, but they were waiting for their Messiah, and they served God and obeyed God in their lifetime, and they loved the Lord, and they looked forward to one day meeting their Messiah. But they died before Jesus was born and died on the cross. So they went to a place called paradise that was in the center of the earth, and it was across a huge chasm, which you can't see very well in this picture, but I tried to display a huge chasm. And on the other side was the people who went to what we call hell, which is also in the center of the earth, but that's where the fire and the torment is. Once you go to hell, you're not getting out until Judgment Day, and it's just a brief time where you basically go to court in front of the Lord's throne, and then he sends you right back to hell. And the Bible also talks about that in the book of Revelation. But anyway, some people think Jesus went to hell. He did not go to hell. He went to Abraham's bosom to get the captives out. These were not the condemned. They weren't condemned. It's the people in hell were condemned, and they'll stay there. But the captives were the people who were the saints of the Lord, like Moses, Abraham, Noah, all those kind of people. They were down there waiting for their Messiah, and he went and preached to them for 3 days, explaining to them that he was the Messiah that they had waited for during their entire lives, and all the time they spent in paradise waiting for him after they died. And then he took them up. He liberated them and took them up to heaven. And that's why now if you die, you either go to heaven or hell. You don't go to paradise. Paradise is empty now. It's been empty ever since Jesus took the captives out of it. But anyway, that also was a great journey. Journeying to the center of the earth to liberate the captives who were in paradise, which included Abraham and all the patriarchs, and taking them up to heaven. Then he went back to earth and revealed himself resurrected to all of his disciples and his family. And after 40 days on earth, he ascended again. I should say he ascended back to heaven. What epic journey has your life taken? Because you also are an epic hero, or you can think of it in this terms. By the time you die, what epic journey will your life have taken? Think about it for a while, because you also are an epic hero. You've been through so many things, so many trials. You've probably traveled from state to state or country to country at some point. You went through college, you went through who knows what. You've also maybe made an epic journey raising a family or being in charge of a business or whatever it was. Maybe you've been handicapped and you can't even get out of bed or get out of a wheelchair, but you have made an epic journey in your mind because your body doesn't work, so your mind is constantly at work and your mind is highly, highly active. Think about it because you also are an epic hero. And that concludes today's lesson. Um, but I just want to let you know if you want to buy the book, there's a link below that you can go to Amazon or one of my other websites and you can buy the book there. And it is a great college textbook. Also, if you want a free book on the gospel and how to be saved, and then you can also there's a link below that you can download this book for free. It's an infographic, so it reads like a cartoon. You can share it, you can distribute it to other people, you can print it out, you can email it to people. Um, and it's written so that it's really easy to understand and there's lots of graphics and images so that it's easier for people to understand and read through. It's 23 pages long and it's totally free and free to share. And I hope that blessed you. See you again next time.